theme of Thrush-Cross Grange. His illiteracy. Oh, God. Hi, my name is Cassidy, and welcome back to my channel. And if you are new here, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Thanks for coming around, and I hope you stick around and hang out with us some more. Today we are talking about Wuthering Heights. Now, before we get into this, I wanted to share a secret. I haven't seen any of the adaptations of Wuthering Heights. Zero. I know, I will get that fixed right away. I just wanted to talk about the book before I get, all twisted up with the adaptations, because I know a lot of them is a lot heat in the controversy, especially this newest one that just dropped this past year, super recent. So I wanted to read the book because I was already on a classic lit roll, Pride and Prejudice and all of that, and I have one more I want to read. But I wanted to see if the book is enjoyable and, just a worthwhile one as well. So I am planning on talking about it in depth. So there will be spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled, pause this video, read it, come back. If you don't care, thanks for sticking around. Let's talk about it. And, definitely let me know your opinions, especially which adaptation is the best one. I didn't realize how many there are. There's like one every decade, I swear. So definitely let me know which ones are the best ones to watch. I'm definitely down for some mini TV series as well. So getting right into the book. So we are starting off with a gentleman named Mr. Lockwood, who is a new tenant for Thrush-Cross Grange. I'm just going to call it Grange. And he heads to Wuthering Heights, a building or a house, to meet this landlord. While he was there, everyone is incredibly rude. And he is like, okay. A storm rolls in, basically trapping Mr. Lockwood there at Wuthering Heights because he's like, I cannot travel back because it's like 4 miles between Grange and Wuthering Heights. And he's like, I cannot travel back in this weather. I'm going to get lost. I'm going to die. And to everyone's reluctance, he stays the night at Wuthering Heights. A servant puts him in a room where he was very much like, don't tell the landlord about this. So while Mr. Lockwood is in the room, he comes across journals, and on the windowsill, he comes across 3 names: Catherine Earnshaw, Catherine Linton, and Catherine. We will get into this. It gets a little weird, but we will get into all of these Catherines soon enough, I promise. But he starts reading about the journals about Catherine Linton, who writes about growing up with Heathcliff. That night, he has like a weird dream/nightmare of this girl who's trying to break into the window of this room and like wants to be let in. He screams, which alerts the landlord, who we come to find out is Heathcliff. When Mr. Lockwood tells Heathcliff kind of what happened, Heathcliff barges into the room and is like opening the windows, trying to let her in, and basically just breaks down. That following morning, like first thing in the morning, Mr. Lockwood takes off and goes to the Grange, his new home that he's renting from Heathcliff. He meets Nellie, Mrs. Dean. We'll call her Nellie. She is the housekeeper of Grange, and basically Mr. Lockwood gets really sick, so he's kind of pretty much bedridden. And he's basically just straight up asked Nellie, he's like, hey, so what's everyone's deal at Wuthering Heights? Like, they were all so incredibly mean. They were very just like closed books. And she's like, I got a story to tell you. They get into it, and majority of this book consists of, it's in Nellie's point of view of telling the story. And you are reminded throughout the story, or it's not Lockwood experiencing it. So it's a different style of writing, which I thought was, once you know about it, you kind of get used to it. But sometimes if you're not aware of that, then it gets a little confusing. But she's pretty good at reminding you throughout this. It starts with Nellie talking about, starting from the very beginning, she was originally at Wuthering Heights as a housekeeper, and she was with the Earnshaws. So the Earnshaws consist of Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw and 2 kids, Catherine and Hindley. Hindley's the older brother, Catherine's the younger. I think it's like 8 years or something like that. Like, it's a pretty significant age gap. The Earnshaws at Wuthering Heights, Mr. Earnshaw takes off on business, going into town or something, returns back with a boy who was an orphan, who he ends up naming Heathcliff, which I believe was named after a son or a family member that he's lost. Immediately, it's very divisive amongst the family. Initially, no one liked him. There has been reference of him being a person of color, and everyone's a little bit racist about it. And Catherine, the girl, she warms up to Heathcliff and they become very close, while the brother, Hindley, absolutely despises him. And there has been notice of it being due to being racist, and being, considered a gypsy or just kind of a servant or a farmhand, and cannot be of anything of status, essentially. But he also becomes very bitter towards Heathcliff because Mr. Earnshaw really just coddles Heathcliff and chooses Heathcliff over Hindley, and Hindley becomes jealous of that. Time goes on. Nellie kind of continues to narrate, saying, Mrs. Earnshaw ends up dying. And since that point, Mr. Earnshaw's health begins to decline. And during this time, Hindley is just being very rude towards Heathcliff, and Mr. Earnshaw just gets really kind of fed up with it and sends him off to like boarding school to a college, just out of the house and elsewhere. Mr. Earnshaw's health continues to decline and he's just not doing well after his wife dies. Catherine becomes closer to Heathcliff, pretty much dependent. And at this point, Mr. Earnshaw ends up dying. Hindley ends up returning to Wuthering Heights and basically takes over as the new landlord or the new master of the house of Wuthering Heights. He ends up taking on a new wife named Frances. We don't really know much about Frances. She doesn't play a huge part in this. One night, Heathcliff's and Catherine's shenanigans, they go down towards the Grange where the Linton family resides. And the Linton family consists of Mr. and Mrs. Linton and 2 kids as well, Isabella and Edgar Linton. As we were saying, one night Heathcliff and Catherine take off to Grange and they end up spying on the Lintons through in the garden, looking into the window. They're looking and they're just kind of spying on them. They end up getting caught when Linton's dog finds them. He ends up biting Catherine, and that's kind of how they got caught, basically forcing Catherine to stay the night. Now, when the family comes across Heathcliff and Catherine, they immediately show immediate disdain towards Heathcliff, referencing him as a thief and just kind of again, a low life as well. And they end up taking Catherine in, but telling Heathcliff to just get out of here, you're not welcome. So Catherine ends up staying the night at Grange, which she ends up really enjoying. The next day, I believe, Mr. Linton brings Catherine back to Wuthering Heights and basically scolds Hindley of his poor supervision, being how these kids can get out and get in such trouble, and got her as well. Hindley gets really upset by this. He does not like to be told that he was made a mistake or anything like that in poor taste. So he immediately just turns and blames Heathcliff. And from this, he forbids Catherine to interact and continue interacting with Heathcliff. Fast forward to Christmas, Edgar and Isabella from the Linton family from Grange, they end up joining or visiting Wuthering Heights for Christmas, But Mrs. Linton had a huge stipulation that Heathcliff isn't allowed to interact with them. Needs to be in a different room, needs to be away from them. However, before removing himself, Heathcliff hears Edgar make a really just mean comment about the way Heathcliff looks. Heathcliff, takes this to heart and vows to get back at Edgar. So there is where he goes back he gets sent into the kitchen where Nellie is, and Heathcliff tells Nellie, but he's like, but Nellie, if I've knocked him down 20 times, that wouldn't make him less handsome or me more so. I wish I had light hair and a fair skin and was dressed and behaved as well and had a chance of being as rich as he will be. So he basically is just not doing well with it. Essentially just vows vengeance from that time forward. So at that point, some more time has passed. Hindley and Francis Earnshaw have a child, a son named Hareton. But Francis dies really shortly after, from tuberculosis or consumption. From that point forward, Hindley becomes very depressed and he starts to drink very heavily. Everyone becomes very walking on eggshells around Hindley, why he drinks, because when he becomes very drunk, he begins terrorizing everyone. No one is safe from him. Meanwhile, during this time, Catherine spends more time with Edgar Linton, whom she invites over one night, which furthers upset Heathcliff after he finds out about this. Nellie, being the best, she's like, I refuse to keep Catherine and Edgar alone. Like, I'm going to be in the room with them. Catherine ends up throwing a fit. Catherine and Edgar kind of get into a fight and ends up slapping Edgar, which kind of startles them. Later on, though, Nellie makes comment that it was very clear that they made up and that they've actually expressed their love for each other. I love you. Later on, though, Catherine talks to Nellie about how Edgar has proposed to her, and she's trying to figure out what to do, is this the right way to do it? She's unsure. So she knows she can't marry Heathcliff because of his status and his color. Hindley has very much also debased him very thoroughly on top of that. So she would be disowned if she marries Heathcliff. Heathcliff hears this. He becomes very enraged by this and he ends up leaving Wuthering Heights for 3 years. He's just I'm out, we're done. Meanwhile, in that time, in the 3 years, Catherine marries Edgar and moves to Grange with Nellie. Nellie goes with him. Heathcliff reappears. He's very wealthy now, though nobody really knows why. There wasn't really anything about the reason behind it. Catherine is delighted to see him again. But Edgar is very troubled, does not like him, very reluctant. However, Catherine is I want to talk to him, I want to see him. So he's very reluctant, pretty much a pushover, and lets her see him. Heathcliff frequently visits the Grange and ends up staying at Wuthering Heights as well with Hindley. Hindley accepted Heathcliff into the house because Heathcliff is rich and can finance Hindley's gambling addiction, and his gambling addiction continues to get worse. Heathcliff then learns, at that time, spending so much time at the Grange, Isabella's around. Isabella, kind of the sister of Edgar, she begins to grow feelings for Heathcliff. However, Nellie's not a good guy, just don't. He's got a dark side to him. They end up pretty much telling Heathcliff that Isabella is into him. And Nellie gets immediately suspicious that there's ulterior motives to Heathcliff pursuing Isabella after finding out about this. Some time goes on and Catherine witnesses a very intimate moment between Isabella and Heathcliff. She becomes very confrontational with Heathcliff. Catherine is what is going on? You cannot do this, you cannot marry her or anything, this is not okay. I'm not okay with it. Edgar hears this and he involves himself in this argument between the two. He interrupts this conversation. Edgar later on asks Catherine's listen, you pretty much have to choose between me and him. And Catherine, girl literally grows sick and ill because she cannot choose between the two men, who I do firmly believe she cares for both of them, but to differing degrees. If status and all of that was probably not a thing for them, she probably would have gone for Heathcliff. But she also very clearly loves Edgar as well. And so she grows very ill. She grows so sick over the next few days. She's not eating. She locks herself in the room. She's not doing anything. Eventually, over those next few days, she allows Nellie to come in and she just can't stop ranting and raving about Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff, and just death in general. During Catherine's sickness, Isabella elopes with Heathcliff and gets married. Over the next 2 months, Catherine slowly improves, hasn't seen nothing about Heathcliff in that time. In the meantime, Edgar has pretty much told Nellie and everyone that he's pretty much disowned Isabella. That was her choice and she's got to live with it. While Catherine's health improves, She finds out that she is pregnant with Edgar's baby as well. And we're also hoping in this time, like Edgar's really hoping like, you know, he will have a male heir to inherit the Grange, which will otherwise go to Isabella and Heathcliff. So that was kind of a thing where like, if Edgar can't produce a male heir, then everything he owns will go to Isabella. But since Isabella and Heathcliff are married, it's going to essentially go to Heathcliff. Isabella, she's basically miserable as Heathcliff's wife. Edgar is ignoring her letters, but when she writes to Nellie asking her, like basically giving her a breakdown of everything that's happened, she asked Nellie to visit her at Wuthering Heights. Nellie takes off and goes up to Wuthering Heights, but ends up mostly talking to Heathcliff, who holds Nellie hostage, basically shares his overall disdain for Isabella, and basically like, I'm using her to get to Edgar and also to get the Grange, to get as much as I can out of it. This is part of his revenge story. Eventually, like Nellie's like, no, I'm not going to help you try and see Catherine, which is why he was holding her hostage. Basically, it's like, I'm not going to let you go until you agree to help me see Catherine again. Eventually, Nellie complies and was like, fine, yes, fine. When Edgar is out of the house at one point, Heathcliff is able to meet Catherine, who is still kind of just delirious. She's talking about dying without Heathcliff, begging for forgiveness and all of this stuff. Heathcliff ends up forgiving her, and Edgar comes home during this time and bursts into the room, and at that time Catherine faints into Heathcliff's arms. Heathcliff gives Catherine to Edgar and tells Nellie, hey, I'll be in the garden to watch over her tonight. That fucking night, Catherine gives birth to a baby, their daughter, who they named Catherine as well, but she will be called Kathy. We will call her Kathy. Kathy was born 2 months early, so Catherine, the mom, dies during childbirth. And I just remember reading this in the book, and I was like, wait a minute. I literally wrote, I was like, is this 7 months later? And I was like, Catherine Linton's baby? I was so confused. And I mean, I answered myself later on about it. I just did not remember reading about her being pregnant. So I was kind of like shocked. I was like, wait, did more time pass? And then when it kind of came back where it's like, oh no, Heathcliff's still in the garden. It's literally that night, the next day or whatever. So that was a shock for me. I did not see that going. It shows when I'm not paying attention, I miss details in this book. Edgar spends a lot of time with Catherine and her body. He basically just like doesn't see Kathy at all, the baby, for a while. Eventually, after he leaves, Heathcliff comes back in to kind of say goodbye to Catherine. And Catherine is buried in a spot overlooking the moors, a very particular spot. After the funeral and everything, Isabella comes to the Grange to tell Nellie about a fight between Hindley and Heathcliff. Heathcliff basically curb stomps Hindley. Like, Hindley was just like wasted, and I kind of can't remember what prompted this fight, but later on, Hindley dies, which then leaves Wuthering Heights to Heathcliff. He was in debt due to his gambling, so Heathcliff was like the financier of Hindley, and so everything ends up being his own. Pretty much right off rip, Heathcliff forbids Hareton from leaving Wuthering Heights. And it's basically like, you're staying here, that's it. Isabella ends up leaving Heathcliff and moving away, living outside of London, where she eventually gives birth to her son, Linton, who she names Linton, which I was like, okay, is this Linton Heathcliff or is this like Linton? Because we find out Heathcliff doesn't have a surname, so he's just Heathcliff. So I'm like, is this Linton? Or is this Linton Heathcliff? Like, I was just so confused. I'm like, okay, Linton is the son of Isabella and Heathcliff. Isabella ends up dying about 12 years later. I think she just gets sick and just kind of dies. So after Isabella's death, Edgar goes to get Linton from London and is like, I'm going to bring him home. Like, he's going to be in my family and all of this. Like, hopefully Heathcliff doesn't know about this at all. Like, Heathcliff did know about having a son, but didn't make any effort to visit him. So while Edgar is in London trying to getting Linton. During this time, daughter Kathy, sneaks out and off to Wuthering Heights and meets Hareton. She discovers that they are cousins. She hates that. She really thought that Hareton was like another servant. Nellie ends up finding, Kathy, and basically was like, Nellie and Kathy both decide not to tell Edgar about this. They're going to keep it between them. Like, that's the last thing they need to worry about. Edgar returns to the Grange with Linton, who is also just really a sick boy. He's very frail, he's very sick. Pretty much that night, like within a few hours, Heathcliff sends his one of his servants, Joseph, who he's throughout this book, but we're just not going to really touch on his character, but he sends Joseph to go collect Linton. Edgar reluctantly agrees, but they've settled on, we'll bring him by in the morning. He needs to rest tonight. So that morning, Nellie delivers Linton to Wuthering Heights and Heathcliff. Heathcliff basically wastes no time showing disdain regarding former wife, his ex-wife, Isabella, and Linton as well. As Linton shows a lot of the characteristics of Isabella, like being pale skin, pale hair, and just like blue eyes. Really no signs of Heathcliff in him. So I think that kind of also was a driving factor between his disdain towards Linton and also being really sick as well. Heathcliff basically tells Nellie, hey, I'm pretty much planning on using Linton to gain control of the Grange. A few years go by. Kathy is now 16. Her and Nellie end up bumping into Heathcliff and Hareton on their outing one day. Heathcliff basically convinces / invites Kathy to go to Wuthering Heights to see Linton, her cousin that she hasn't seen since the day he was brought home. Kathy accepts, but she doesn't recognize Linton right off initially because he's grown a lot and he's also a lot more sick. Afterwards, Linton and Kathy begin to write letters to each other secretly. Nellie finds out and puts a stop to this and basically is like, hey, you need to stop or I'm going to tell your father, Edgar. Heathcliff loved it and he's hoping like this could be the reason that they could get married between Linton and Kathy. So he's like, why are we stopping this? That winter, Edgar gets sick. Heathcliff bumps into Kathy and uses this opportunity to convince her to visit Linton again. Basically just claiming like he's been so affected since, they stopped writing letters to each other and that, he's just not doing well and it's like, it would be so good for you to see him again. Reluctantly, Nellie goes with Kathy to visit Wuthering Heights, and Linton is so sick, even worse than when he was last seen. And his behavior is very just rude and bratty. He's very just sits around a lot, doesn't do a lot. And from that point forward, Kathy ends up sneaking out at night to visit Linton while no one was watching her, between Edgar being sick and Nellie having her own duties as well. Edgar finds out by Nellie about her sneaking out and still being in contact with Linton. He basically forbids Kathy to continue visiting Linton. However, he was like, Linton can visit the Grange. He's welcome to come here. Edgar is not doing well health-wise and feels like his end is near and is worrying about leaving Kathy alone. So he kind of wants maybe Linton's a really good guy and Nellie's not really telling him the truth of how he really is. So he's under this impression hey, he's going to be good for Kathy. She'll at least have someone. Kathy and Nellie go out and meet Linton, agreed upon spot, which was kind of like a halfway point between the two houses. It was way closer to Wuthering Heights at this point, but they were already there. And Linton is acting super strange on top of being even more sick and just overall weak. He becomes very paranoid and thinking about his father being nearby. And he's like, no, this is what, you need to stay here, all this stuff and acting super weird. And this happened a couple times. On one of the visits, Heathcliff appears during this meeting and convinces them to come back to Wuthering Heights. He then locks Kathy and Nellie and essentially Linton in a room. until Kathy and Linton are married. He's like, I will not let you go until these two are married. They bring Nellie up to a room and lock her into this room for 5 days, bringing in food, and like that's it. After the 5 days, Nellie is freed and was able to find out that Linton and Kathy were indeed married during this time. She is trying to get Kathy to come home with her, but it was just no go. Like Linton even wasn't like, he was very reluctant to disobey and to hand him the keys and stuff. So she just takes off to Grange in hopes to tell Edgar and to make sure he's still alive and to gather people to go and get Kathy from Wuthering Heights for them. So when Nellie gets to the Grange, she finds out that Edgar is like on the verge of death. Like he is not gonna live very long. Edgar, realizing this, he also asks for a lawyer to change his will so that Heathcliff won't be in control of the Grange after he passes. However, the lawyer ends up arriving too late. Edgar dies and is buried next to his wife, Catherine, on the moor. Backtracking, Kathy has been returned home at this time to say basically goodbye to Edgar, and Edgar dies pretty much right after. So forgot about that part. So after essentially the funeral, Heathcliff comes and collects Kathy from the Grange and brings her to Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff, in the meantime, was also told Nellie, was like, hey, listen, I convinced the man digging Edgar's grave to remove a portion of Catherine's coffin. So when Heathcliff dies, he can have the same done to his own coffin and put next to Catherine. That way there is nothing between them anymore. Nellie's like, are you kidding me? Like, that is insane. And following that, Heathcliff takes Kathy to Wuthering Heights and tells Nellie to stay here at the Grange, basically separating those two. And it's like, don't come looking for her. I will reach out to you if I need you. Nellie hasn't seen Kathy for some time at this point. She's getting some info from one of the other maids at the house, or the servants, Zilla, another minor character, kind of some updates on this, where she finds out that Linton has died and Heathcliff continues to treat Kathy terribly, very poorly. Nellie at this point finishes her story and is like, we're pretty much up to speed because this is where you came in as the new tenant for the Grange. Mr. Lockwood was shocked by this entire story, was like, are you kidding me? Like, I cannot stay here. He announces his plan. At this point, he's doing better. He announces his plan to Nellie. He was like, hey, I'm going to go to Wuthering Heights. I'm going to talk to Heathcliff, and basically I'm going to tell him I'm going to be out of town for the remainder of this lease, and I will continue to pay that in full, but as soon as my lease is up, I'm not renewing. So go ahead and start looking for another tenant. So he heads up to Wuthering Heights, and he now is seeing everyone for who they are after the story is like pretty much well versed. So he sees Kathy, who is truly miserable, where she's spending a lot of her time making fun of Hareton and his illiteracy. And this is all of Hareton's upbringing was just due to the neglect that Heathcliff was denying him, access to college and all of stuff, like basically revenge on Hindley to his son. So Mr. Lockwood talks to Heathcliff and informs of his plans and was like, hey, I'm out, I'll pay everything in full, don't even worry about that, and all of this stuff.
6 months later.
6 months later, Lockwood finds himself in the area again. And he was like, hey, this is great timing. Like, I'm going to wrap up my business officially with Heathcliff and Wuthering Heights in general. So he ends up going to the Grange, finding out that Nellie's not there anymore. So he pretty much the servants there were like, oh my gosh, we had no idea you were coming. So they make a bed and everything for him. He pops over to Wuthering Heights, where he kind of sneaks in through like a kitchen door or window and sees Nellie and was like, Nellie, and Nellie was just like, what are you doing here? Like, you should have told us. Like, we had no idea. We would have prepared everything for you. And pretty much gets the scoop on what's happened from the time he left to now, so the 6 months that's occurred. He finds out from Nellie, pretty much continuing her story, Heathcliff has died and that Hareton and Kathy have formed a close bond and are pretty much in love. How that came to be was that Hareton experienced a accident, and during this time, Kathy started to teach him how to read, using all the books and all this stuff, and essentially fell in love. During this time with Heathcliff, he began to spend a lot more time alone, stopped eating and drinking. He would be out all night somewhere, or he'll be locked in his room the entire night, just mumbling and talking and like not really sleeping. And he overall became more agreeable, but he also had like a weird smile on his face like the entire time, just kind of out of it. He seemed to be talking to ghosts. He was constantly noting that he's like, I feel close to heaven. And then one night, Nellie finds Heathcliff in his room before an open window that like a rainstorm came through, an open window, and basically like jump started herself when she saw like Heathcliff's face, where he was very much dead, but he had a smile on his face and his eyes were open, and it was just very creepy. With his will, essentially, he was buried next to Catherine in basically one coffin. So it goes like Edgar, Catherine, Heathcliff, but Catherine and Heathcliff are in like one coffin together. Crazy. At the end of that, she also tells Lockwood, hey, like Kathy and Hareton are prepared to marry and move to the Grange. Essentially, that's just how it ends. Very much like a cliffhanger, but it was good. So at the end of this book, I kind of wanted to talk about some underlying themes, which is class and status, or classism. And this was very much evident due to, and it's kind of tied into racism as well. It's Heathcliff being, he's got a very uncertain background. We just know he's an orphan off the street, and it's mentioned him being a person of color, but it basically talks about him being, dark brown, dark complexion, dark-skinned gypsy is what they used in the books as well, to reference Heathcliff. So it's very much leaning towards being a person of color, not a white person. And on top of that, being with an uncertain background, they pretty much, even though he was adopted into a higher status family, no one really treated him that way because, even the Lintons were shunning him. And even when he returns to Wuthering Heights as a wealthy man, everyone continued to struggle to like classify him. Or it's like, yeah, he's got wealth, but like he doesn't have status. He doesn't come from status. And he's still a dark-skinned person, a person of color. He's just basically continues to be regarded as nothing more as like a farmhand. So he's got very much an uphill battle in that. Hareton also faces challenges in gaining respect. Although being born into a wealthy family, if you will, and also being able to inherit, or being born into inheriting Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff's refusal to educate him and the fact that everyone generally disregards him, they pretty much just treated him like dirt the whole time, leaves him in a state of, being ignorant and just like in the service. That pretty much changes when young Kathy, basically starts treating, over time, finally starts treating Hareton, providing some education and all of this. Was Hareton able to obtain his actual class status that he was pretty much born into? His transformation towards the end of the book is very much highlighted, and that you can show that he's grown into it. He becomes his manner of speaking also changes, where he's not very, I don't know how to phrase it, like his manner of speaking becomes a lot more polished towards the end, as, he continues to thrive under this education, which we did see throughout the book of him wanting to read, but he kept getting ridiculed and belittled, so he would turn to violence instead in that time. So it's kind of just interesting where it's like Hareton also kind of like, you did know his background, but he grows into the status that he was born into when he was finally able to like showcase it and become educated. However, Heathcliff was also an educated man. He also just continued to be disregarded as someone of status, even though he had wealth. even if it was revenge driven, but he had wealth. And so he was just, so there's very much an undertone of racism throughout this entire book of how people interacted with Heathcliff and mentioned him being like a dark-skinned gypsy and all of this stuff. So that is an interesting kind of parallel between the two. And then there's also a theme of intergenerational abuse and trauma. Basically a cycle of revenge where, it started with Heathcliff vowing revenge on Hindley for being mistreated, right, and all this stuff. And then he channels that abuse to the mistreatment of Hareton, Hindley's son, by like not educating him and just keeping him as like a servant level. Like you're just helping around the house basically, and nothing more than that. And then it continues to his revenge of Edgar, because he basically married Catherine, his love, but also was treated poorly by Edgar as well, even though Edgar was more tolerant of Heathcliff for a little bit before it got too much, before he got sick. And so he channeled this revenge into marrying Edgar's sister just for her status and her wealth, in hopes to gain the Grange, which he ends up getting because he also played a part in holding back the lawyer who's going to change the will for Edgar when Edgar was on his deathbed. So like he made sure to the best of his ability that he would have the Grange as well. And then it continues that even though Kathy reminded him, and even Hareton reminded him a lot of Catherine, his love, he continued to treat them both poorly. He also then utilized, because he had such a disdain for Isabella as well, and also knowing that Linton wasn't really anything of his own, like a son that he wanted, essentially like didn't showcase any of the behaviors, didn't showcase that he was strong because he was very sickly the entire time and only continued to get more sick, that he ended up using Linton to marry Kathy so that way he can secure further wealth and actually manage, Wuthering Heights and the Grange and just manage everyone. However, towards the end of the book, it became very clear when Heathcliff did tell Nellie that, hey, like my revenge is fulfilled, I'm good, we're good. And that's kind of when he started to become very distant, very agreeable, very just odd. So it's kind of crazy just to see how far Heathcliff and Catherine's love for each other went, where it was both destructive and very deep at the same time, to the point where Heathcliff didn't stop at anything until he was essentially back with Catherine. And it was interesting that he was finally able to be sick, or started to get sick, when he relinquished all that revenge. Almost like as if it was time for him to now meet Catherine, when he was done wreaking havoc on the entire family. So in a nutshell, book was good. There was a brief period in the part 2 when it comes to Kathy's story, essentially, because Catherine's already dead, that it was a little bit of a slog to get through, where it's just talking about, her upbringing, her being sheltered and all this stuff. And it was before Linton really ever came into the picture as well. It was a bit of a slog to get through that, but then it picked back up and it was good. So I do recommend reading this book. There's a couple good lines in here as well. It was enjoyable. So I have zero regrets reading it, and I do recommend reading it if you haven't. Now I'm gonna watch an adaptation. Again, let me know which one will be the best one to watch. Probably watch a few, we'll see. And again, I just want to say that I do have my bookshop link down below to support local bookshops and me as well if you choose to. With that being said, thanks for hanging out with me today, and I hope to see you guys in the next one to talk about the next book. I do have some things lined up, and I'm very excited to just chat shop with you guys. So I will see you guys in the next one. So love you, see you, bye.